Welcome everyone. Thank you very much for coming today to this UL Research Week event. It's a real pleasure to be here again in this fantastic space. This is the first time I've seen all three spaces being used contemporaneously. So the Fab Lab is running classes, we're running this event, and there's a public consultation about a new cycle path happening over there. So it's really interesting because this is exactly what the space was designed to do. So it's really fantastic to be here. My name is Stephen Kinsella. I'm the principal investigator of SmartLab. But the goal of this event is to tell you about what we're doing, what we have learned so far, and what our plans are, which is really exciting. I mean, I think one of the things that probably excites me most about SmartLab is the potential to talk to many citizens. That's really what's very exciting. We're going to be able to go in, talk with people, help them improve the heating of their homes, tell them more about the built space that they actually occupy, which is just brilliant. Like we talk about social science all the time, and experimental behavioral science. This is real social science because you're really talking to people. And luckily we're bringing on board next generation analytics, next generation sensor technology, and everything else. So yeah, it's all about us learning how to help citizens learn about their houses. So it's really wonderful to be a part of all of this. I think the best thing I can do is shut up as quickly as possible because I want to introduce my colleague, Dr. Madeleine Lice, who has a leadership role in SmartLab and is somebody who will give us a bit of an update on what SmartLab is, how it's going, and what we need to do next. And then we're going to have a bit of a chat, some of the principles. But with that, and maybe a little bit more jazz music, Dr. Madeleine Lice, everyone. Cheers.
See you here, lovely to meet you. My name is Dr. Madeleine Lice and I'm project manager of SmartLab. I think it's an interesting project because it's marrying together some of the really cutting edge work going on at European level in the energy transition with life down here in Limerick. One way to think about it, one of the pieces of news that jumped out at me in the last week or so was that in Germany, the government have just banned the installation of new gas and oil boilers in buildings from January next year. Done. They're gone. And just like that, change comes, and it comes quickly. It seems sometimes, I think, in the Irish context, because of our sclerotic housing system and our housing crisis, that it's going to take enormous amounts of effort to make any small change. But in fact, those changes are coming quickly. And SmartLab is part of learning about what's happening at European level and being involved in that and working here in the city and using the city and the people here as a way to move forward. So I'll start with really basically, this is what the project is doing. We are going to be installing 2 different kinds of sensors in 50 to 100 Limerick City buildings. That could be homes, residential buildings, offices, retail, you name it. Those sensors will send 2 different kinds of data. They'll send electricity usage data and indoor environmental data, right? So things like CO2, humidity, temperature in the building, via a LoRaWAN network, which is a kind of low-range network that just sends small packets of data. And that's really useful for us as a project because it means you can join without having broadband access, for example. It'll send it to a digital twin, to some very powerful analytical software owned and run by one of our project partners, through to a user interface where people who are using these sensors, who have them in their buildings, in their homes, will be able to understand what the data means, and we'll help them understand what that means and work with them as we go along. So that's the sort of basic background of what we'll be doing here in town. But to jump back out, to look at the kind of the overarching work behind it, we need to look at something like this. So, the European Union is interested in developing different mechanisms for supporting the energy transition at European level. Our project in particular is looking at one of those schemes, which is called the Smart Readiness Indicator, which you could kind of think of as a sort of more sophisticated BER rating. It's a measurement of how well a building is ready to become smart, to get ready for a new kind of energy system. It assesses, it's interested in buildings becoming more than just shelter, more than something that kind of keeps the rain off, and moves towards being something that looks after the needs of the occupant, is responsive to it, is much more energy efficient, and which is able to interact with the energy grid, which means you don't just receive energy, use it, and it's gone, but in fact, excuse me, the building is able to work to generate its own energy, to store energy, to share energy back into the grid, right? So this is the high-scale work that's going on at European level. And it's part of an EU directive of the Parliament, which will be an optional scheme for national governments across Europe. We've begun thinking about how an SRI might work in Ireland. This is, I know, not particularly legible, but one of our project partners, IES, have begun looking at what would it mean to make a typical single-family home get an A grade, right? This is where we're thinking about the BER rating. What would it take for a building to get an A grade on an SRI rating, on an SRI assessment? So they're looking at the different costs involved and the different kinds of mechanisms. And we can share this. This is being shared publicly, so you can go home and Zoom if you need to. But it looks at things like space heating, lighting, the dynamic envelope of the building, which is the idea that your building would have mechanical shutters, which would respond to external stimuli. So for a long time in Ireland, we didn't really think about trying to do things like, shading. Why would we bother? And then in the last couple of years, all of a sudden, everybody's worried about how do I keep my house cooler during these heat waves, which unfortunately we know are not going away. And energy flexibility is where you're starting to push towards the higher, snazzier grades of the SRI assessment, right? So that's where your building starts being able to respond to the grid and feed back into the grid. And little bits of this are happening. So there are projects in Ireland right now which have two-way EV charging, right? Where the car, an electric car, is able to store electricity, take electricity obviously from your building, but also feed back into it. So there are tests of this work going on. But a lot of it is pretty high level. And if you think about trying to figure this out in Limerick, you need to develop a careful approach. So obviously our project, what we're doing is giving people these sensors for free. They're worth about 350 quid. And we're installing them for them, and we're helping them to get used to them and learn how to use them, and we're learning together. We're doing that by using a particular methodology, a particular approach called the Living Lab approach. This building here is a Living Lab. It's a registered member of the European Network of Living Labs. And a Living Lab is both, or can be both, a building and an approach, a methodology. What you're looking at there is the draft ecosystem in Limerick here, where we've begun mapping out who are the particular kind of players, if you like, who are the participants that we need to talk to, we need to approach, that we need to bring together so that we can all kind of feed into a vision for a future, so that we can all begin working on how this transition might work, right? And the important thing, or one of the important things about a living lab methodology and approach is that it's iterative, right? So you're learning as you go. You're willing to adapt your project plan and figure out where you go next through working with the participants, through working with the other stakeholders within the project. So we're drawing people in to this project in lots of different levels and lots of different ways. You'll see the academia one there at the bottom. Welcome. And trying to kind of use that to really push forward together in a way which brings, and which feeds back in then, importantly, right? Policy outcomes that are based on the reality of this, right? We are expecting to be told in some cases, for example, the sensors did nothing for me. I just could not interact with the technology, it didn't work. Or I really loved learning about this, but I don't have the money to do the work, right? We need to know all of that. There's no point presenting a shiny package back to the EU and say, or to the SCAI, who I should have mentioned, fund the project, and saying, look, this is all perfect, hooray, grand. You should be able to get Limerick all done in 2 weeks. We need to be able to feed in the reality of it. So that's what we're doing, and that's how we're working together. And this is a little bit more about the background work that our project is doing to develop stakeholder journeys for different kinds of participants in the project, which have these loops where we learn and move on together. We've already started hearing from participants. We're at an early stage. So we haven't begun installing, we'll be doing that in May. So we're hearing from people who are interested in joining, right? And these are the kinds of things that they're saying about why they want to join the project. There's this mixture of real fear and concern around energy costs, which you'd expect. But you also have people who are really interested in what data can teach them. Some of whom, for example, will already have building management systems in place. Others might, there are a tiny number of buildings in Limerick City Centre which are, believe it or not, still using wood and peat as to heat their homes. So we really are building a picture of a real Irish city and learning through that. Pulling back to this one, just to kind of bring things in and give you a tiny bit more detail. So this is our method or our function. These are the sensors we'll be using. One is an energy clamp, which clamps into your electricity meter. So it was really important for us that no electricity wiring or work would be needed to be done to the building itself. And the other is the environmental monitor, which will literally stick with a sticker onto the wall of the building. So we're kind of being as light touch as possible and as functional as possible. This is a screen grab of the live digital twin of the particular, this is a zoom in, if you like, of Limerick City and of the project zone. So this is live on our website as well, and you can zoom around and have a look at it, and this is the detail for this particular building. So once we're up and running and we have sensors in about 100 of these buildings, we're going to have aggregate data at the bottom of the screen, which starts to show you what's happening in Limerick City. It gives a lovely picture of where these buildings are and how they're working. I'm pretty much done explaining, I think. So I will just plug it a little bit because we're still open for applicants. This is our project zone. This is where we're focused in Limerick City Centre. This is a map designed by Limerick City Council as part of our development plan, City Centre Zone. So if you are, or own or work in or manage or rent a building within, or a part of a building within this area, and if you have access to your energy meter, to your electricity meter, you're more than welcome to apply to join our project. We'd love to have you. I'm going to stop there, I think, and I'll move on and let you hear a little bit more detail from people who can kind of give you a bit of a deeper dive on different aspects of the project, and I'll let Stephen pull them in. Is that all right? All right, thank you very much.
Cheers. Can I call up, please, Helena Fitzgerald, Sinead Harrigan, and Keena Flaherty? We'll have a chat. Yeah, just to plug that again, if you think you're someone who could, or you know somebody who could apply for these, facilities, please let us know. I think it's very important. I'd just like to welcome Cian and Sinead particularly. Cian's CEO of Convex Lens and facility. Sinead Harrigan is the manager of the Citizen Innovation Lab, as well as an administrative officer in the Limerick City and County Council. And Helena Fitzgerald is a research fellow in the Department of Economics and the lead of the SmartLab project. I want to go to you first, Helena. That massive, complicated, liney diagram showing all the things connecting to all the things. It's a living lab approach. Like, what is that? Madeline gave a really nice, succinct answer, but could you expand on that for me, please? Like, what is it? What does it mean for the average person in Limerick, and what does it mean for UL?
Yeah. So. Thanks, Stephen. It's a good question. So living labs are real-world arenas for experimentation. And given that we face a kind of a significant transformation in our day-to-day lives as we transition to being a climate-neutral economy and society, that living labs create a forum where stakeholders from across society can take part in processes to explore and shape what that future might be. So SmartLab is one of the living lab projects which are being implemented through the Citizen Innovation Lab. It does involve a real-world deployment of smart sensor technologies, an Internet of Things deployment where real people and real buildings are going to interact with these technologies. But the project team and the collaborating team are orchestrating the living lab as a policy living lab because we want to use these interactions to generate insights to inform potential policy around implementation of a Smart Readiness Indicator in Ireland. Taking a step back from SmartLab to look at kind of the wider ecosystem, which really was initiated by the Horizon 2020 project, Positive City Exchange, that kind of set up a theoretical basis for kind of how innovation happens and how cities can change, which really focuses on this idea of open innovation. And what we have seen, and it's been kind of trialed and tested really since 2019 in Limerick, what we're beginning to see is a cumulative impact when you begin to program this ecosystem thematically. So, we've had projects which, look at enabling creative collaborations between communities and artists to try and develop a response to the transition to climate neutral that matters to them and their communities. And that one in particular has involved really high levels of engagement. I think almost 1,000 people, that's kind of just short of 1% of the population of Limerick took part in that project. And we were able to map, using some of the approaches developed in Positive City Exchange, we were able to map the process they went through decarbonising together against a behaviour change, the trans-theoretical model of behaviour change. So we can actually track people's progress through a process of behaviour change through the Citizen Innovation Lab. So for people in Limerick, it means that they get to explore and develop a sense of ownership over the process of change. And we've used some digital tools for engagement here, like a crowdsourced mapping tool, where some people in Limerick have gathered data around, sustainable transport or safe routes to school. And they've been able to kind of secure a really high number of data contributions from people, which they've then submitted to local statutory consultation processes like the development plan and transport plans. So this is really a mechanism for impact because people can engage and then gather data and then use that in a really meaningful way that has the potential to affect local policy around the city's transition. For research, we've kind of made a bit of a splash, I think, a small one maybe, in Europe, because there aren't that many living labs that operate in this way, that we have a particular citizen focus. There are other city as living labs in Europe, but they tend to be kind of quite technology-led, whereas we're really focused on the citizen's experience of the transition. And we know that that's really important because people who have agency, who have power, who have finance in society are going to be able to transition to climate neutrality. But it's the people who have resources to do that we have to really kind of coax along, and we have to be aware of the challenges and difficulties they're facing so that we can have better interventions, policy interventions, to allow them to make that change. And I think this is kind of understood as a just transition. I think there are different understandings of what that term means, but a just transition in terms of the Citizen Innovation Lab is that everyone can benefit from this process of change. So in terms of UL, we've been included in some joint research centre publication around using an experimentation space like this for regulatory learning, because we were able to produce examples of how citizens could inform local policy development, but also the Limerick City and County Council through how they program the space have been able to implement a small business innovation research process, also with Cian,
yep.
Which is a top-down approach to regulatory learning, which is working its way through the Department of Housing, Local and Government and Heritage through a regulatory change process around fire regs in the upper floors of Georgian buildings. So I think that kind of answers your question.
It very much does. It very much does. Final question to you, Helena. And is this happening anywhere else in Ireland?
No.
Great answer.
There are other living labs in Ireland, but we're the only city as living lab. So, there are kind of Smart Dublin, Smart Dublins, but they're regarded as test beds. They test new technologies, whereas we have this network or this kind of research infrastructure which allows us to engage across society. And as we kind of program that, we can actually program this ecosystem now for impact. We can read, we can kind of track where projects are delivering impact. We can identify gaps. We can then choose to pursue other project opportunities to address those gaps. So things like well-being and climate change would be something that we haven't specifically addressed to date. Yeah, so it's really interesting actually to see the ecosystem evolve and to see the potential. Like, we're only beginning to realize the potential now of the Citizen Innovation Lab.
I think that's fair, and it's a perfect segue to ask Sinead, how has the Citizen Innovation Lab been working so far? What have you been doing? I mean, Helena's mentioned a few things, but what have you been doing? And fundamentally, what are your highlights? You've been managing the space for a couple of years now. What have you been doing, and what's the main
I suppose
thing for you?
The space was developed through the City Exchange project, which is a Horizon 2020 project. It's a collaboration of many organisations, but Limerick City and County Council and the University of Limerick. And through that project, this is how the space was originally developed. My role in that project was as citizen engagement and participation and collaboration manager. And again, through the project, the space was developed, and it started with us trying to implement, I suppose, some of the processes and the practices that were developed through City Exchange, which was the project around energy transition, and that's coming to an end now in October. So really over the course of the last 2 years, through City Exchange, but then, as Helena has described, we've started to kind of build momentum with other projects, and using different mechanisms, and SmartLab would be one where it allows citizens, I suppose, to interact with the smart technologies. Creative climate action, we were lucky enough to get funding for that, where it uses creativity to allow people, and it's all about engaging with climate action, sustainability, energy transition, and we also have a little bit of a focus on city centre transformation here, just because of our location. So from a council perspective, I suppose, and you have the research and academic perspective from the council perspective in terms of climate and sustainability, when you think of the level of change that's required, and also then there's a juxtaposition there with the kind of formal processes that the council are required to use to make changes, to enact policies. This has been a really interesting place for us to kind of develop new ways to engage with our citizens, to allow citizens to participate, to co-create, for citizens to kind of trial and test different ideas, prototype different things. It's a neutral space, I suppose, for the council in many ways, and the collaboration with the university is so important on that basis, and we're also trying to bring in other stakeholders as well. I suppose for me, as someone who's, I've worked in different local authorities for 20 years, mostly in communities. I worked in regeneration for a good portion of my career. So it's been really interesting to see these types of projects, and let's say the smart technology projects, the creativity projects, other projects, how they allow communities to explore climate and sustainability in their own time, at their own pace, and then that it can be a really meaningful enabler for people to take actions and then to engage in change. For me as well, it's also been about trying to get the council is a big organisation, it's quite a sprawling organisation, and there's so many different departments that now have a role in climate and sustainability. Like, for instance, today it's great to see the Active Travel department. They've started to use this space a lot more for their community engagement. And again, it's just this growing awareness that this type of citizen engagement and participation is really required. So I suppose we are building momentum all the time with different projects. Yesterday we had Academy of the Near Future, which is another, it's actually a Smart Dublin project where they have secondary schools come in and engage with smart technologies. So we're building all the time, and we're bringing in new stakeholders. We had TUS were in here with their community energy course. It was great. We had people from all around the country here discussing sustainable energy communities and the future of that. That was only a couple of weeks ago. So we're building momentum all the time, I suppose. Yeah.
I love, what I love about that is multiple people coming in with multiple uses, and the fact that you said it's a neutral space really matters. Like, people can come in, they can use the space, and then they just leave, and something has happened, and it's at their pace. We're not, it's not being shoved down anyone's throat. It's saying, we have this thing, if you want to have a go at it, that's great. If not, that's fine too.
Yeah.
There's something that it gives people a lot of power to be able to say, yes, I would like to do this.
Yeah.
And then you both learn.
Yeah, because you're kind of building understanding over time. We saw that very much in Decarbonising Together in the Garryowen community, which is a community that wouldn't have engaged much with climate action to date. That project allowed them to, I suppose, grow their understanding of the issues, but in a localised way, really centred in the community, and then enable them then to it was kind of just to make the first steps towards climate actions, and they've formed a sustainable energy community now. So that was really inspiring, I suppose.
Yeah, I can remember listening to a member of the Residents Association here talking about it in February to one of the directors of the European Investment Bank, and the guy was just blown away. It was just, this is incredible, and I think that's why I asked Helena, is this being done anywhere else? And I think it's very important. I think that I personally am not from Limerick, and I very often reflect the fact that we are genuinely excellent at lots of things, and we tend to not notice that. So I tend to very often just keep saying, and is this happening elsewhere? No. I've got a colleague, and he's just invented a new kind of metal. And I asked him, what is this for? And he said, it's for hips. And I said, have you told anybody about this? And he said, I told the person I'm sticking the... Why didn't you do this for anybody else? He's like, it's fine. And, I think it is important that when we do new things, we celebrate them. And I think that's one of the best things about Research Week. I want to go to you now, Cian. You run a business. You're doing something that's very much at the edge, the actual frontier of what are called smart services.
Yeah.
Okay. So could you first define what is a smart service for the average person, and then think a little bit about how do you see these things evolving in Ireland? Because it's very important. We are in a certain place that's very rapidly evolving, and you're at the edge of it for us. So can you just A, tell us what it is, and B, tell us where it's going? No pressure.
No pressure. How long have you got? Yes, thanks, Stephen. For what we do is we tend to take smart technologies like sensors and wireless networks and back-end software, and we make it into something that's intelligent for people, largely focused in buildings, which is why we're involved in SmartLab. The whole concept of smart services in SmartLab, the point of making a building smart can be lost sometimes because it can feel like the technology is we're serving the technology in the project. It's just there, so we should do it. What the smart service concept is really supposed to do is to round out how the technology is supposed to serve us, both in the goals of having habitable homes that are comfortable to live in, but also with a minimal environmental footprint, or at least a reduced environmental footprint. And that's really important. It's important not least because of climate change, but it's also important because so much of the city and the country lies vacant and derelict, and bringing those buildings back into use is probably going to require technology as much as investment. So smart services largely are the sort of piece of the jigsaw where we've done the thing where we collect the data from your building. We take a view of, or we pick up how much energy you're using on a daily basis, maybe how much solar you're generating on a daily basis. And the smart service is supposed to be that glue or putty that sits in between these moving parts and allows them to optimize without you having to manage everything. I mean, we might all, or some of us might have had a sort of a home app that gives us access to a smart thermostat. And the pitch is that by the time you're on the bus, you turn on your thermostat and the hot water is there when you get home. That's not a smart service in the purest sense of the word, because you still have to flick that switch on the bus. And buses are really complex places. You have your headphones in, there's a guy who's just after falling over, you've forgotten the thermostat, the water's still cold when you get home, and you're 500 quid down for the smart technology you haven't used. That's not a smart service, that's a technology that you're serving. What we want to do is take the pieces of information that can actually improve how the building works. So rather than getting home and putting the thermostat on when it's most expensive and inefficient at 5 p.m. to use, can the service trigger things? Can the networks and the technologies turn around and say, reduce the footprint of the building? Can we charge your hot water off of your solar? Can that be automated? Can we tell you, these are good and bad times to do things, but deliver it in a way that you'll actually be able to action? So you're home, you're on your phone, it comes in as a notification, you can do it, it's useful. They're the sort of smart services we need to get to, because I guess climate change is an enormous collective action problem. And the point of collective action is we all have to we have to coordinate doing the right thing at the right time. And so the technology is a fundamental to kind of link us to the building and people, but the service is what is designed, and that's why the diagram is so complex, is designing from that data the right things to do at the right time, and then getting people to do it or automating it. And the holy grail is the complete automation of those things, taking the humans out of the loop, because we're already pretty stretched and stressed. Looking after the planet is probably a problem that's going to drive us all over the edge. So automating all of these small things in aggregate at a city or a national level is actually hugely impactful, given the amount of emissions and energy intensity our buildings take up. I forget the second part of your question.
Where's it all going?
Where's it all going? Automation would be the holy grail. Automation and the sort of extracting more use from the buildings we have for longer periods of time. So the carbon that we've already spent building the buildings is the carbon that is not coming back. If we can figure out ways to repurpose, look, if we filled Limerick City in the vacant spaces over the shops in the city centre, you could fit 4,000 to 6,000 people in the city.
4,000 to 6,000 people.
Yeah, in the project Helena mentioned we were involved in with the council, fire safety is a huge blocker to making those changes, because the costs to meet the regulations are extremely onerous, and the technologies that have to go in by law, or at least by interpretation of the law, are very expensive. So pulling people back into buildings we've built is the most carbon efficient way of housing people. And it's also, if we can put services in place that automate the comfort in that old building to make it more warm, at the right times, make it more greener in terms of the energy supply it's using. Automating those pieces as they go into the building fabric, that's the dream, ultimately. Things like the last end, just as an example of Madeline's chart, was grid optimization or balancing from your EVs, which is a far out kind of a concept where you're using the battery in your car to provide a storage space when there's too much wind blowing and we have nowhere to put the electricity, and then it can pump it back into the grid when you're not driving and there's no wind. Doing that requires hugely complex software as well as connected hardware. That's the dream. Doing that automatically while you're parked up and inside in your bed, that's the dream, and that should help us move towards maximizing investments in where we live, how we get to work, and the energy system, and greening all of those things concurrently.
There's three things about this I love. The first is I love the ambition of it.
Yeah.
I think it's brilliant. I love.
I can't promise it's all happening in SmartLab.
Yeah.
But the goal is over the next
goal.
period of time, research and R&D can bring that to bear.
Together with policy makes it happen. The second thing I really love is it's a vision where the actual existing hardware is working for us.
Yeah.
And the third thing, which is, as you were talking, I was thinking about, is like, well, you're really talking about taking away the generational scar that is the immersion.
Yeah.
That's really what you're talking about.
Yeah.
The immersion is going to go away as something that we, and every person who heard the word immersion felt the same thing. Oh, is it all?
Yeah.
The fact is, AI is taking care of it.
That's it, yeah.
ChatGPT is sorting the immersion out.
And it's an underserved market because we're an outlier in our use of immersions. It's not a thing. Our European friends kind of look askance at us when we talk about things like the immersion and sort of the horror show of our approach to warming water.
Yeah.
It should remove it. It should remove it completely from your life and probably from the material of many Irish comedians.
That's true. They won't have any. They won't have anything else to say.
No, very little. We're all back to talking about pubs.
It's a sad thing. We have to close this session now, but I think there's time for one or two questions if anybody has one. And if not, I'll ask colleagues for closing comments. Please.
My question is, really interesting. So, sorry, thanks. If you were trying to get more people to participate who are in the boundary, unfortunately I'm outside the boundary, but what's the cell? Because, for the participant, there has to be a bit of a cell. So I understand that you're going to have the monitor and the sensor. So what do they get at the end of it that will help them to do something? Because this is about gathering data.
Yeah.
So what can your little business around the corner here do? What's in it for them, I suppose, other than the greater good?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And research has shown that this, enabling users to have access to real-time energy data can lead to a reduction in energy consumption by up to 20%. Now, we have a target of 10% on this project, which we hope to demonstrate. So participants will be getting, first of all, they'll be getting that knowledge now about their energy use. So if something has been left on, or if something is malfunctioning, they can make an intervention before they get their bill at the end of the month. And this is something that doesn't happen. The smart meters aren't doing that yet. So that kind of knowledge is really a really useful guide to behavior change. But I think the other side of it, which isn't, it's a real aspect, I think, of gathering data around internal environmental conditions, because that has a huge impact on our health and well-being. It doesn't have a huge weighting the way the SRI is calculated, because the Smart Readiness Indicator is trying to enable energy grid innovation and flexibility and demand-side response. But I think for the building user, knowing what the humidity levels are, the carbon dioxide levels, what particulates are in the air you breathe. So that's really valuable information, and particularly when you're dealing with vulnerable groups or, poor quality housing, that information could really guide impactful interventions in the building.
So we're going to save you money and make you healthier.
That's great. No, I'm just
pretty good.
And you get free
Absolutely.
sensor.
Yeah.
And you get a free sensor.
Thank you.
Free screens. Any more questions?
Thanks very much. And this may be, potentially a difficult one to answer, but obviously SmartLab is an SEAI-funded project. The work that you're doing is very long-term in its thinking and in its potential impacts. And so beyond the end date of the SEAI project, what level of commitment is there, or what level of commitment do you need to make sure that the potential impact of the research is felt? Is it more commitment from the university or from government, or where do you see the facilitation of this sort of research coming from in future?
Great question. I guess the first, I mean, I'll let everybody give a potted answer to this, but my answer is all research is temporarily funded. So this all began, as everyone said, from a 5-year funded positive city exchange funding, and then that led on to 3 or 4 different projects, which will then lead on to 3 or 4 different projects. The reality is all research is cumulative, but it's temporary in its cumulative nature. So we just have to keep applying for funding, and eventually, we'll get there. That's just the nature of the beast. Cian, what do you think? I'll go this way.
I guess we're a private sector company. So we have a market-driven view of how we want this to take off. We have already the cross-cutting sort of application of what we're doing is really interesting. We've been invited to do something similar with a project based in the northeast of England, run by Northumbria Water, looking at utility and resource usage. So we see short-term the vast gaps in data has to be squared away. So one of the outcomes that we'd like to see from the project is an understanding of just how big the gap is between where we need to be in terms of data collection and where we are, and how quickly we can get there with better technologies that are there now. And we think that's a short-term goal. Long-term policy change at a governmental level to kind of push at the problems, but I think I would be like Stephen saying that's going to be cumulative and built up over time. You'd nearly need a separate funding stream to the amount of time you'd have to spend to get policy changed at a governmental level.
And Sinead?
Yeah, I suppose for the council, again, this is, there's a host of projects taking place within the council, but I suppose this year we'll be drafting our climate action plan for Limerick City and County Council, which is that's an internal focused plan on decarbonising the council, and definitely the learnings from SmartLab will form part of that because we have so many buildings in the city centre that we are responsible for. In the long term as well, though, it also, I suppose, reinforces the council, which started with City Exchange, our approach to using kind of smart technologies, I suppose, to build our knowledge, and using that approach especially in terms of city centre reactivation. And the Smart Labs is, I suppose, part of a host of things that are aimed at that goal of increasing the population of the city centre and reactivating the city centre. Yeah.
And finally, Helena.
Yeah, so another really great question. So we've been working in this field, in the clean energy transition and engaging citizens in that process of change since 2019, and what's been a feature of this work is just how quickly the future is coming at us. That in Horizon Europe research, up until we started having this legislative basis for becoming climate neutral. You were working at the horizon. You were working at kind of breaking technologies, which did seem to be a distance from adoption. But we are seeing that accelerating, and that there are 2 actions in the Climate Action Plan which directly relate to what SmartLab are doing. And one is looking for a 15% target of demand-side response by 2025 in the Irish energy market. We're some way short of that. And if we are to achieve the overall targets for demand response, we have to start finding ways to engage small energy users in providing energy grid services. And at the moment, there's some fantastic companies like Viotus and Limerick who are working with large energy users, but nobody's cracked how to do that with small energy users. And there's a huge kind of market shaping exercise to happen to try and work out how that can happen. And there are new kind of roles. So there's so much capacity for innovation in Limerick from the work that we're doing, that in the Netherlands they have aggregator roles, and these are people who would gather up small energy users and then kind of sell their ability to adjust their energy usage to the grid, and people would get paid for that. you get ordinary citizens participating in the energy market. But we have targets in Ireland for 2025 for that to happen. The other one is around car charging, two-way car charging. So, yeah.
Great answer. I think our time is up, ladies and gentlemen. So we are just about to invite you all to take a tour of the Fab Lab, which is just out into your left. Ger Walsh is the manager of the Fab Lab. We're very happy to show you all the cool toys and excellent things that he has for everyone there. Thank you very much for your time and attention. It's not small that you come out on a day like today, so thank you very much for that. And I'd just like to thank our panel for their time and expertise, and also for their commitment to the project. And finally, to recognize our colleague, Dr. Miguel Angel. Sorry, for some reason I caught. I very much like to recognize all of our Smart Lab colleagues, Dr. Madeline Lies, Dr. Miguel Angel Rangel. My God, I can't get your name right. I'm very sorry. It's gone blank on me. And for everybody, for the Research Week team for organizing this event. Thank you very much for that as well. It's not small. Thank you. Take care.